Hello everyone, and welcome to our channel. Today I am going to read stories from our AskReddit about the parents who have disowned their kids and what was their reason. This is part 2 of the 2-part story series. So make sure to check part 1 of this series as well. Parents who have disowned or genuinely stopped loving your child, what happened? I have been legally disowned by my father. When I was 11, my mum was diagnosed with terminal cancer. This was her second diagnosis in around 4 years. Obviously she recovered the first time after intense surgery and a lot of chemo, and he did not want to look after her like he did before. He also had a new girlfriend and her family to look after apparently, and he had no issues leaving us. When my mum passed away when I was 14, my brother, grandmother, him and I met up to discuss who I was going to live with. The plan was my brother and his family. Father was never considered, and he showed up and declared that he was in the process of going to court to legally emancipate himself from me. He went out of his way to legally declare that I was no longer his child. Just so that my brother, 22 years old with a wife and 2 young children already struggling on one paycheck, couldn't seek child support. Needless to say, it stung, coming only days after my mother's funeral. My mother and her sister were both adopted into a great family. Recently, my grandfather fell ill and we were told to prepare to say goodbye. So the family gathered. My grandmother has had a hard time with her memory since she had a brain hemorrhage, but she welcomed my aunt into her home during this tough time. Whilst my grandfather was in his final week, Wendy, aunt, took my grandmother's ATM card and proceeded to spend well over $1,000 on herself and get herself a motel room. She also attempted to steal their car. When my uncles found out, she basically disappeared into the wind. After my grandfather passed and his funeral was all sorted, my grandmother went to an attorney to write Wendy out of any inheritance she would get from their estate when she passes. She didn't press any formal charges, because the whole process would have been lengthy and more painful for her. She didn't need the extra stress. I'm pretty sure one of my uncles also threatened Wendy to make sure she stayed away from my grandmother from now on too. As Jehovah's Witnesses, my parents disowned my siblings and I several times since I was in my late teens. One of the JW rules is that you do not associate with others who know the truth but refuse to follow it, including family, and parents are encouraged to disown any children who have left the religion. The first time was when I was 19. It upset me, I was heartbroken, and eventually they changed their minds only to do it again a couple years later, and so on until I stopped caring and no longer attempt to be a part of their lives at all. My family disowned me because I disowned my mother. I was sexually groomed and abused, tortured by her husband for years, and when I finally told her, she not only didn't believe me, but stayed married to him for 7 years. I had to move out at 16 to get away from how I was being treated. Then when I finally began speaking to others, she started to cover her ass with her social circle by telling them that I seduced her husband. I cut her off for years, and didn't ever want to see her again, but my family bullied me to just get over it and have a relationship with my mother, and that I was hurting her. Even my sister, who knew what happened, knew I stayed for so long to protect her, fell into a trap of my mother whining to everyone around her and painting me as a liar. About 4 years ago she was very sudden diagnosed with advanced cancer and didn't have much time. I was moving out of my home state and everyone told me I needed to see her before I left, that I needed to be there, but I didn't want to. In the end everyone turned their back on me. They were so mad I wouldn't just forget my trauma just to say goodbye to someone I hadn't loved for a long time, and rightly so. I disowned a family member, not a child though. We were very close, until he ended up being caught in a pedo sting. Then I turned my back and haven't looked back. I have a sister the age of the girl he was supposed to meet. I can't associate with scum like that. FYI, according to my sister, nothing was ever done to her. Disowned my stepbrother for the same reason. He was caught in a giant sting, and was charged for having kiddie porn as well as breaking into teen girls' emails to find lewd pictures, to blackmail them into having sex with him. He was 21 when he was caught. The most ducked up part was that a couple years before he was caught he had broken into my email and done the same thing, tried to blackmail me into giving him more pictures. I was able to get him to keep his mouth shut because the pictures he found of me were from I was 15, and I threatened to go to the cops to charge him with child pornography. That shut him up real quick, probably because he knew they'd find whatever else he was hiding. I wish I had gone to the cops, because maybe I could have prevented him from harming those other girls. But I honestly had no idea the extent of it. I thought he was just being a supreme creep to me personally. The SWAT team ended up raiding our house, waking up my dad with guns in his face and forcing him to sit outside in his boxers while they searched. My brother is serving 18 years. He tried to send me a few letters, with some bullshit apology. I told him to leave me the duck alone and haven't talked to him since. Not a parent, but my parents stopped loving me the moment I was disfellowshipped as a Jehovah's Witness, and I was promptly kicked out. I knew nothing of how to live on my own at the time, but I had a decent job and survived. My brother stopped associating with them 2 years later and lives with me, and they since moved away, 1,500 miles away to be exact. It's easier to tell people I am orphan or that I do not have parents, cause it's hard to explain how they would stop loving or want to associate with their own son over some stupid cult rules. I wouldn't say I've disowned or stopped loving my son, but it's real tough to find love for him. He's almost 14 next month, and he's currently out of our home at a treatment facility. He's averaged 2 arrests a year for the last 2 years, and he's attacked my wife several times, our daughters several times, and the neighborhood kids several times. He's run away from school, run away from home, and tried to push me off the roof of our house, after threatening to jump off and hurt himself. We have become that family in our town where the police are called to our home on a semi-regular basis. He's been getting more violent as he gets older, not to mention bigger and stronger, and I honestly don't see an end in sight. The key fact I'm leaving out is that he's been diagnosed as high-functioning autistic and is also bipolar. That's like putting walls around a tornado and expecting it to stay inside the walls. A lot of what has occurred he had little control over because of the way his mind is, where he's constantly at war with himself, structure versus chaos, and my wife and I have tried desperately to give him the best life we can while keeping ourselves and our daughters safe, but I'm tired. It's been 8.5 years we've been going through this with him, and I've been ready to throw in the towel on him for a while. But my wife refuses to let him go, so we wake up every morning trying to give him the best life for him and our girls. Since it seems to have widened a bit, a family torn apart. Based on an aunt and her niece. Aunt starts signs of dementia at a relatively young age, is moved into an assisted living home. Niece, who bounces around jobs, gets Hyrix to go visit her about once a week, take her out to the mall or a walk in the park, whatever. Paid handsomely. We get an alert that aunt has a check bounce from her account that should have $5,000 in it. Niece has drained the account. Proven beyond a doubt, with receipts. Niece would take aunt to aunt's bank machine every Friday and withdraw $200, then fill her car with gas aunt can't drive, and charge us hours when she clearly didn't spend hours with aunt, charged us claiming she took aunt to appointments. There was no appointment. We can actually call the doctor, FYI. The family rift. For some bizarre reason niece's family took her side. My father said my mother's issue was she had too many children and it gave her some kind of brain fever, much like a dog that loses its mind after having too many puppies. My mother said my father felt trapped by me. He was planning to leave when it was just my 2 older brother, and then my mother got pregnant with me and he felt obligated to stay. Now that I'm an adult with 2 kids myself, I think I realized that both of my parents are just extremely mentally ill and incapable of loving anyone, including themselves. I love my son, but he abused me. When he turned that violence on to his sister by choking her, I had to say goodbye. My parents disowned my oldest sister. I'm the youngest of 3 girls. My oldest sister had a horrible relationship with my father, blames me for getting in the way of their relationship. She had her first baby, to spite him, when she was 16 years old. My father refused to give her money because she met a deadbeat child predator, and got pregnant again and again. She constantly put herself and deadbeat before kids. Dad would send money to girls for Christmas and birthdays and never heard a thing. He finally gave up. She's 30, has 6 daughters, and lives in a mobile home in North Carolina. We hadn't seen or heard from my sister until June of this year. My oldest niece contacted me asking to come to Florida, where I live, for the summer to get her and her sisters out of the trailer. I agree, contact sister and she agrees. I set up plane tickets and organize the rooms they'll stay in. When they got here, they were completely disheveled. Clothes visibly dirty, smelled foul, so covered in lice that my white towels stained gray from removing them. My niece informed me that they had been without water and electricity for 6 months. They live in a 2-bedroom mobile home, there are holes in the roof, bugs and rats everywhere. As a family, we decide the girls aren't going back to North Carolina. We tell my sister to come to my parents' house in Florida to get her life together and get back on her feet. She refused because deadbeat is not invited. Ironically, she found out that deadbeat is cheating on her. She confronts him and he kicks her out of hit hole trailer. Deadbeat said, "I would rather be homeless than live with you." Sister now works for the dollar store and doesn't pull her weight with kids. At least the girls are safe now. I hope you had a great time listening to these stories. Thanks for listening. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more daily videos.